How you doing? I'm Mike Gatty, and welcome to a special edition of the Patterson Park Podcast. Today I sit down with Shelly and Norman O'Foran and talk water monitoring of the Chesapeake Bay, specifically the back estuaries and shallow shoals of the Chesapeake Bay that currently are not continuously monitored. In order for those waters to be monitored, small community groups currently get into kayaks or in small boats, paddle out to these hard to reach areas, and check the water using handheld devices. Shelley and Norman hope to change that. Norman created these bobs, bay observation boxes, right in his garage. Actually, it was in their greenhouse because Norman's background is in horticulture. Shelley's background is in teaching high school English. And together, they have created this program to not only monitor the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, but to get students involved with that program. So sit back and listen to their story as we talk monitoring the waters of the Chesapeake Bay using community groups and students. Take a listen.
Right. So we wanted to retire mostly not because we didn't want to work anymore, but because we wanted to have control of our own time. And so we knew that we would keep working, but we were just kind of deciding on what we wanted to work on. And Norman was looking at working with submerged aquatic vegetation because he's got a horticulture background. You tell that part.
Yeah, and I just started reading about a lot of articles about submerged aquatic vegetation in the bay and how they needed to be restored, but turns out to be very important for the health of the bay. So I got interested in that, and just happened to also very coincidentally found out about or read about Makerspace equipment like microcontrollers and electronic stuff, which I had no previous experience in, but I could see it seemed like an inexpensive way to increase the water quality monitoring, which is very important to the SAB, to the seaweed, basically. So it's like a whole I don't know if subculture is too strong a word for it, but there's a whole bunch of folks out there that are like building their own drones, and they're building all manner of like stuff, like even wearable clothes that lights up. It's all manner of stuff. And the same people that have like 3D printers. And so with these microcontrollers, you can make lots of different things. And I got to thinking that, well, maybe you could make inexpensive water quality monitoring equipment, which turns out to be pretty expensive.
So wait, okay. So there are groups right now obviously monitoring the water quality of the bay. Like, so how are those groups? Where's the pitfall? Where is it that the monitoring is lacking that you thought, oh, we need an inexpensive way of doing it?
From all the articles that I read, it seemed like many of them said, oh, if we only could do like more intensive monitoring, like the monitoring that does go on, and quite a bit has been done, is like in the main stem of the Chesapeake and focuses on the big wide open areas. And a lot of the SAB grows in, these smaller creeks and all that. And so it seemed that there was a lot less monitoring of those smaller areas. And even now it seems, if you read some of the stuff on the Chesapeake Bay and go to some of these webinars, they talk about moving into the shallows, moving into these up creek areas where not a lot of work, it seems, has been done. But you could do a lot more work, but of course, researchers are kind of constrained by, their budgets. And so, they want to be able to, the equipment to do that monitoring that's commercially available is fairly expensive.
Are they government groups that are doing this monitoring? Is it local groups, state groups? What?
Well, there's all manner out there. I think in the scientific community, it's mostly like the colleges and universities. Like University of Maryland is very involved. William and Mary has a pretty big program for monitoring the submerged aquatic vegetation. And then the Chesapeake Bay program, which was set up as, I think, a consortium amongst all the watershed states. That's like a government, quasi-government organization. So that's where a lot of that's all the mainstream research has been done, a lot of it through those folks. But there's a lot of smaller watershed groups that are volunteer groups like the one we're a part of, or there's two that we're a part of. And, they have some handheld equipment and they go out and they do some manually done, we go out in kayaks and boats and all that and do monitoring that way. And even those little pieces of equipment will run you a couple $1,000s, $1,500 to $2,000 at a minimum.
We got involved with a couple of those groups, right? So when we go out and do that kind of water quality monitoring, we'll go to an oyster sanctuary where it's really important to know what the water is like right then, right there for those oysters that they're trying to encourage. And so we go out there and we have to go when the weather's good. We have to go when we can take a buddy. We have to go when the kayaks, we have to go when the boat's available. So like in a season, we might only get measurements. This year, we only got measurements like 3 or 4 times.
Through a handheld device in a kayak paddling into
Right, or in a boat.
Backwaters.
Yeah, and so Norman's idea was, well, what if I could use this Makerspace equipment to make an automated buoy that would take all these measurements and just continuously put it up to the internet every 10, 15 minutes or so.
Which is what the big groups are doing, right? I mean, like say NOAA, we were talking about NOAA earlier on another call, and you said that they had buoys in the main portion of the channels that were doing that. But it seems to me from what you said, the disadvantage is they're in the main portions of the Chesapeake. And also, how expensive are those continuously reporting sort of super buoys that these big government / quasi-government groups are utilizing to get this data?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I'm guessing they probably run $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. I mean, NOAA does have like a very cool system of these buoys, and you can get on like right now and check out the weather out there and see all these parameters. But to replicate that back in all these smaller areas would be probably very cost prohibitive.
So you got to thinking that okay, so you were online poking around in Makerspace when you were still just thinking about all of this stuff, and you said that there was a that these backyard weather stations seemed to kind of fit a template that was in your head as to where this could go. How did it evolve in your mind from a backyard weather station to a Makerspace continuously reporting buoy of bay information in the backwater?
Yeah, I think it was, I mean, I just happened to see in looking around that there is these weather stations and they're fairly inexpensive now. And people buy them and put them in their backyards. And it just seemed like a good analogy that, there's plenty of people around here that have a dock. And maybe instead of a weather station, they would have, something like one of these bobs that we call them. And, it would be the same thing, except it would be for water quality. And it would be a way to raise awareness about water quality, just like, broadly speaking.
And then I think the other piece is it allows you to tap into citizen science, right? So if you kind of do the same thing that Weather Underground does, and you get your kit, right? So you get a kit, you get a Weather Underground station, then you now become a little weather station that's broadcasting the weather conditions on the web, and scientists can use that information. That information is out there for anybody to use. So if we could make these bobs, which are bay observation boxes, if we can make them cheap enough that like anybody with a dock could have a bob, Now they're doing water quality monitoring that becomes citizen science that's accessible. So now we've got better breadth of coverage and better temporal coverage in the bay in all these little nooks and crannies that previously weren't getting a lot of coverage.
Okay. So in the course of a couple of years, you've figured out how to create these units at less than $1,000 a crack, how to launch them, get them in the bay. How many of these little buggers do you currently have floating out there? And how much data are you getting from them? And is it continuous like the NOAA's is, or is it, sporadic?
So we've launched 12 of them. We have 2 different grants that we work on. So we work on one for the Career and Tech High School near us. It's called the James A. Forrest Career and Technology Center. So they had a grant from the Chesapeake Bay Trust for $5,000, and we launched 7. And then we had another grant for $10,000 for the St. Mary's River Watershed Association for their oyster restoration sites. And we did 5 more for them. And then both of those grants were renewed for this year. So we're doing both of them again. And we're going to make a total of, between those 2 grants and one that we had a donation for, we'll have in the spring 18 of them in the water. Now, so when they're in the water, and this is experimental technology, so sometimes they go down, whatever, but when they're in the water and they're not on the workbench getting upgraded or whatever, then every 15 minutes they're sending data. And so for the one grant that we had 5 buoys for this summer, we added up and we had like more than 1 million pieces of data just from that one, just from those 5 buoys.
So they do their best to based on like past history, essentially, to figure out, well, here's a good place that we should try to do restoration in, but they don't often do like a really in-depth water quality review of it and like measure things like intensely over time. So that's kind of the thought we had was, well, this is one of the things that we could do is if we could field some of these devices and we could get better information and select, maybe this would help in the selection of a specific location. If you know that one area is better than another area, then you're not going to waste all that valuable time and effort. And it's not just the cost of producing the baby oysters, it's also the cost of, getting out there with volunteers often, or hiring boats to go out there and put it there. So all these things enter into, what's the most cost-effective way to use, your scarce resources to try to be most efficient in pushing forward the oyster restoration and, in the overall bay. So if you can pick an area that's better than another area, then it's just better use of your money.
Okay. So you came up with this idea in the Makerspace area based on home weather stations. And then you got the idea of deploying these low-cost monitors out onto the bay. But that's only part of the story, right? There's a whole nother part of the story. And I think, Shelly, that's where you come in. How are you integrating this into classrooms and the community? And it seems like you've taken it the next step.
So Norman actually woke up one morning and said to me, we should be doing this. We should be using your education experience. We should be doing this in the schools, because that way you're not just improving the water quality monitoring, but you're doing a lot of outreach to get people more aware of the need for water quality monitoring. And the whole education piece of working with kids builds that next generation of stewards for the bay, right? And I'm an English teacher. Like, I don't know anything about environmental science. But what we did was we approached a teacher at the local Career and Tech Center, and we suggested to her that we do some work together. And she was very amenable. We've established a great partnership, and we go in And we do this as part of project-based learning. So in schools now, and I was really into this in my English classroom, in schools now, the idea of learning through doing a project is, and having an authentic experience is something that's really being explored. So what we do is we go in, we work with the kids at whatever part of the project we're on, and we fit it into Dorothy's curriculum. So we did a lesson with them on working with the data. We did a lesson sort of on the same day. Let's clean our data, let's clean our bobs. We brought our bobs out of the water and we're like, look at all the junk that's growing on these bobs. They took the junk off, they counted it, they classified it, they did all kinds of environmental science learning things with it.
And they came up with the name, Bob.
Yes. So we went in one lesson last year. We had our prototype in the water, and we went out we got a call one day from one of the groups we worked with, and the woman was like, I was out there and I did not see your buoy. And we were like, she just didn't know where it was. So we go out there and we're like, we don't see our buoy. At that time, that was like $800 worth of equipment. Okay, so we got out there with a kayak, we kayaked all around, we couldn't find a bob. Well, he wasn't called a bob at that time, but we couldn't find the buoy. So we went into the school and we said, hey, we have a problem. We lost our prototype. And so we had them do some brainstorming. And part of it was, we talked about getting having a cellular signal. So having the GPS on there so we can figure out where the thing is. So if it leaves its location, we know. The kids took a vote, and half of them thought that our buoy had been messed with, that someone ran over it with a boat or stole it or destroyed it, and that it was evil intent. And the other half were like, no, it's not, it just, the rope broke,
Dog ate it.
Right, the dog ate it. So they decided, we need to personify this thing. We need to make it clear that it's a school project. We need to make it friendly. We need to make people not want to run over it with a boat. So they called them the Bay observation boxes. He's got a little character. He's got a little magnifying glass, whatever. They designed the logo. They designed a web page to go with it. And they did all the branding. And that grew out of a real life problem. We lost our prototype and we don't want to lose another one. In sort of good news of the universe, 4 months later, some paddleboarder who was out in the winter, which you should not do, public service announcement, don't do that, found our bob under a dock. All the writing had come off of it, and he remembered that it had been in the bay next to a Friends of St. Clements Bay buoy, called them up, they called us, and we got it back.
It seems to me like every single facet of education is touched on with this rather simple, straightforward concept of monitoring water in small estuaries around the bay.
So we've worked other class. So this is a career and tech center. The graphics communication kids worked on the logo and the branding. The kids in the engineering class did some help last year doing some soldering. We're working this year, Norman and this one kid are building an entire bob. So Norman and this one student are building this bob together. And yes, it touches on all of these different components of education. The kids have written press releases. Dorothy, the teacher, has talked to them a lot about, if you go and get a job in environmental science, unless you're working for some grand giant place, most of these small organizations, as the environmental scientist, you're also putting out the press release and doing the marketing. So you need to have an idea. Like, they don't learn when they are engaged in this in our project. It would take me a whole unit to teach them how to write a press release properly. They don't learn all that. They just get a little taste of it. And then next week we calibrate instruments. And then the following
They get a little taste, but they get a very practical taste of it.
A real authentic taste of something. And the things that the kids say, periodically we do a Google form and ask them, what's been your experience like? And they're like, one kid said, I had no idea that even such a small project had so many pieces and parts that had to be figured out. And another kid said, it's so interesting to me that the answers to this project cannot just be looked up on the internet, that there's not just answers. Like they think the first time we asked them to find something out, their solution to finding that thing out was to email Norman and say, Mr. O'Foran, how do I clean the bobs? And we were like, no, we want you to figure out how to clean the bobs. We don't have it figured out yet. That's why we asked you to do it. But
Their first reaction is to Google how to clean the bobs.
Exactly.
And then when that does, so back to the bobs for a second. But what has been what nights have you been up at until, the next morning trying to solve a problem that was all you thought was going to be impossible to solve, and then you got to the solution?
So I think the hugest part has been, there are so many facets of it that, and none of them, like I'm an English teacher. Norman is a horticulturist / project manager. Like none of them are things that we are like, oh yes, I learned Python in college. Like we don't have any of this. But that's also to me the most inspiring part. Like one of the things I always try to talk about with the kids is, hey, if you get into something and you need to know how to do something short of like brain surgery, you can learn it on the internet. Like we're in a world where anything is available to you. And so I think the most challenging part has been that there are so many facets and so many pieces. Like if I'm writing a press release, that's my world. I know how to do that. But I'm only doing that a small portion of the time. I'm not an environmental science teacher. I have Dorothy and Norman sitting in the room to like stop me when I go down some like non-science road that's wrong. And they're like, actually, like,
don't drink the bleach. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I understand.
The other piece is that we have to remember that like we're constantly working on the next problem. So right now our problem is we've got them in the water. We figured out how, mostly Norman has figured out like how to make the solar panels work, how to make them not run out of batteries, how to make it so that, they don't float off, how, like all these things, right? How to keep them for a season so we can get our million pieces of data. We don't ever really think about, wow, that's cool. We got that far. Instead, we're like, we now don't know how good our data is. Like, we've got to figure that out. We don't know how to figure that out. We have to figure out how to figure that out.
And the other thing is like, we didn't like wake up one morning and say, hey, we're going to do all this stuff. It's kind of like been like a breadcrumb kind of thing.
Right.
We're just following some breadcrumbs here. And it's kind of like,
yeah, I mean,
morphed into or grown into like some of these things that we've gotten into that just seem like a logical path to follow down.
Shelly said, we are constantly working on solving the next problem. And while Shelly and Norman have huge talent and have launched this program from nothing using their own money, they need some help. They need your help. If you would like to become involved in this program, please reach out to Shelly and Norman. They would love to hear from you. Meanwhile, I'll talk to you soon on another special edition of the Patterson Park Podcast.